What are you looking for in that CRO?
So the way that I always view it is
Joe Gravino, Vice President of Go-to-Market Search at Falcon.
Is number one, and this is table stakes, they have to have the track record. The way that we run all of our hiring processes, we'll survey. Like if you're in our process and you're a candidate, I will send you a survey ahead of us doing a deep dive on your entire background for you to basically answer the starting and ending revenue and EBITDA growth for your last 3 companies. So I can explicitly see the companies you've been in, have they grown? If they have, great, I'm going to want to know why. If they haven't, then I'm going to want to know the story with that too, because there are some great leaders that get caught up in bad deals and they might be outperforming their market to a certain degree, and it could be a down market for whatever reason. So track record is what I look at first. Second thing is assessing the skill set of any individual for that portfolio company and whatever the task is at hand. I think that is so fundamentally important when you're talking about trying to hire, because in every single case, it's going to be a different hiring profile and it's just going to be a different person unique because every company is unique.
Hey, Joe, how are you today?
Hey, Dan. Doing well, man. How you been?
I'm doing all right. Nice to see you. Nice to talk to you. I'm looking forward to our conversation. And we're going to focus our conversation today on people because you are the people guy. I'd love for you to explain your version of like, what do you do and how'd you get there? And then I got a whole boatload of questions I want to ask you because I'm really curious.
Yeah, happy to go there. I think like many people that are in executive recruiting, I didn't grow up wanting to be an executive recruiter focused on private equity, but landed it out of college. So out of college, I was doing a 1-year master's program over in England. I was applying for a number of jobs in Cleveland and Rochester, where my wife and I are both from. And I came across a posting for a company called Untitled, now called Falcon, which exclusively does recruiting of C-level leaders, so CEOs, CFOs, and heads of commercial for private equity-backed businesses that are between, call it 5 to 100 million in revenue. I knew nothing about private equity at the time. I knew nothing about executive search at the time. Fell into it and absolutely loved the arena of recruiting individuals and really just unpacking everything that makes a strong transformational leader in terms of how they tick, and what makes them put a lot of points on the board for these private equity sponsors, which is the domain that we exclusively focus on. So been at Falcon. I just had my 7th anniversary, which is crazy. It feels like 15 plus years, but that's the lowdown in terms of just, not a long career, but been doing it for 7 years. 3 years ago, I made the transition to focusing exclusively on go-to-market executives. So that includes CROs and VPs of Sales, or chief marketing officers or VPs of marketing. So that is my whole domain of what I do on a daily and weekly basis, is recruit CROs and CMOs for private equity-backed organizations.
So 7 years, same company, first job out of college, impressive as hell. Congratulations. I want to dig into that.
Big part of luck too.
So, well, sure. But I don't know that I believe in luck. You can say it all you want, but you create opportunity. You don't just wait for stuff to land on your plate. And I think luck perhaps is a perspective of, it's the byproduct of being really freaking good. And I'm going to start with that. So the reason you and I are having this conversation today is because you post on LinkedIn just about every day. And every single one of those posts is freaking brilliant. It's awesome. It's great thought stuff. And I asked you one day, we were on the phone, like, how do you come up with this stuff? And you said, it just lives in my brain. You gave me your answer. And my guess is, wow, you're really, really good at what you do based on your posts, which is the reason why I asked for your connection on LinkedIn. I wanted to meet you. And now you're telling me you've been at Falcon for 7 years. My guess is also, because I guess a lot, you get phone calls all the time from competitors saying, dude, come over here. Do what you do for Falcon over here. Falcon's doing something right to keep you there and other great talent that you have there that's been there for a while. What are they doing right?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm just, once again, a little bit of luck out of college, finding the right organization that was led by the right people. And look, I talk to leaders every single day, and you hear stories of organizations that aren't led by the right people, or layoffs happen, or companies degress, and you just hear all types of situations. So understanding, just listening to hundreds and thousands of stories from executives about what happens out there in business just makes me incredibly grateful for what I fell into and how lucky I am at Falcon. So when I joined 7 years ago, at that time we had 7 people. I joined as an analyst. We were doing probably, call it 10 to 15 executive searches per year for a select number of clients. We had 2 partners, Rob and Lindsay, who were effectively leading everything. And so typical small company in Cleveland, all in the office every single day together. And it was probably about 2 years in where we were always very good at doing what we do for private equity. We had private equity firms that loved to use us time and time again. Rob and Lindsay had a great idea that was never our biggest issue of really winning new private equity business. There are so many private equity firms buying so many companies that need, leadership across the board that was never our issue. It was more of when a private equity firm would come to us and say, hey, we want to do a CEO search with you. The bigger challenge was then finding the right candidates. And I mean, that's just what any executive recruiting firm is going to be tasked with and is going to be most challenged with. And so we decided to shift our entire strategic focus away from just focusing on private equity firms and focusing on how can we build stronger relationships with the people that we're trying to recruit for private equity firms. So we flipped the model completely on its head. That's when we created what is now called privateequitycxo.com or PECXO.com, which is now 30,000 members that are either current private equity-backed executives or aspiring to be private equity-backed executives. And the whole idea there was that if we create an online digital community where we can create our own content, but also work with the executives who are out there leading and on the front lines, create content with them, keep it all on one site, and then help all of these leaders get better because, let's face it, you've been a leader before, and I talk to many leaders all day long. Being a leader is an extremely lonely job, and they all need help. They all want somewhere to turn. They're all looking to improve because they're very competitive individuals. And so we created this with that outlet in mind, all to gain more, basically, relationships and understanding about who these individuals are, what they aspire to do with their careers so that we have a better, chance at placing them into phenomenal private equity-backed opportunities. So we created that, and then we created our own assessment because most assessments out there are just not very good at what they do in terms of identifying the traits that make somebody successful in private equity. And so we went out and created and literally designed our own assessment that waits for that and tests that at those various things like execution, emotional leverage, leadership, cognitive horsepower, and everything that makes somebody successful in this very finite arena that we're talking about. And, over the last, call it 5 or 6 years, that's taken off. The assessment has taken off, and we've grown to 35 people. Rob and Lindsay have done a phenomenal job at investing in the people, making sure that we're all trained, that we're all heard, that there's a path for us to grow in our careers. And I mean, it's not overly complicated how you keep retention high in an organization. You just have to create a success path for the individuals to move up through and continue to double down on investing in their training and enablement to get there. So that's what they've done over the last 7 years since I've been there. And it's been a fun ride. Sorry for the long-winded answer. I know I covered.
No, good answer. And there's a lot in there to unpack and talk about. And I think that you're talking about leadership. You're talking about good, high-quality leadership that focuses on the individual, training and development, making sure that people don't have a reason to take the phone call from a competitor to say, hey, why don't you leave where you are and come on over here? We could do it better. Look, people are still going to leave, but at the end of the day, you as a leader, a company needs to take great care of their best people. You mentioned you got some war stories that you see on a regular basis. You want to share any? In fact, I'm not asking you. Please share some. Share some war stories. Don't use proper names or nouns. Just keep the anonymity in it. But I'd love to hear some dirt, man.
Yeah, in terms of just situations out there and these private equity-backed businesses of where I guess not unethical, but war stories of what's happening out there, or in terms of job changes and what's happening in companies. Where are you going with it?
Anything, because the idea here is I want you to help me help startups figure out their shit and avoid making problems. In this case, this conversation, people problems
Oh,
that are
perfect.
going to kill them, that are going to kill them in the long run? You probably have a million of those.
Yep. No, that is a great question. I'm happy to go in there. So I will give you just the context of the world that I live in, and I will let you know just the key people hiring mistake that I see made. So for a lot of these startups, or let's just say we work for a lot of private equity firms that will buy a founder-led business. Let's just say it's a $10 million software business. Up until that point, the founder has grown the business to a good inflection point. It has a good product. It has good customers, has strong retention, and really the founder and maybe one or two other salespeople have been running demos, and that's the entire sales organization. What I will see a lot of times is that we will get a lot of calls for this too from private equity firms. Is private equity firms will buy that company, and now everything needs to be built from a commercial standpoint. You need to hire the team. You need to put in Salesforce.com. You need to put in all of the processes, sales process, a forecasting process. You have to run all of the go-to-market strategy around the ICP, the TAM analysis, the personas, everything. And what they will sit back and say is, oh, we need a CRO, because a CRO knows how to do all of that. But where that gets them in trouble is they'll go out and they'll pay top dollar for this highly strategic CRO that gets in there who's used to leading teams of 30, 50 plus as a second line manager, where they are very strong with go-to-market strategy and a lot of those things, but they can't roll up their sleeves and actually do the tactical execution that's necessary. And so they'll get this person that can come up with a great strategy and implement some great processes, but that doesn't actually lead to any pipeline or any converted pipeline or any meetings that are happening to drive revenue, because they haven't been the one directly responsible for actually, really having to execute that on a day-to-day basis. And so my message to any private equity firm that's buying a company that was founder-led up until this point, now they need to grow from 10 million to 50, is make sure that you get your VP of sales hire right. Find somebody who is able to really build that frontline seller organization and set them up with the right processes and enablement to be as effective as possible in the field, because that's going to jumpstart everything, as opposed to hiring a CRO that's trying to do marketing, CS, sales, and obviously this is all about priority and where you focus. That's just too many things to focus on all at once, when every single function needs to get built basically simultaneously while you also have to hit your number. That's the world they're living in. And so I'd much rather see an organization essentially take the budget for a CRO, break that in half and hire a VP of sales and a VP of marketing. They go build their domains the right way. And that's how growth happens at these stages, as opposed to the CRO that comes in and just things stagnate because of that. That's what I see a lot of the time.
Yeah, I've heard the story before. I've played that story before. I'm a CRO. I fit exactly into what you're talking about right now, and I've seen every flavor of disaster that you can imagine, and hence why I do this conversation / podcast show. The CRO role. Sometimes it gets misunderstood what a CRO actually does. What's your definition?
That's a big role. It is a big role that I think only is warranted for companies that have a second line level of leadership, or where you at least have somebody leading the sales team. And then you want a CRO, my definition of it, is bringing in a highly strategic go-to-market leader who can oversee sales, marketing, and customer success, and tie together all three of those organizations to really drive revenue for that business. That is, in my mind, what I think of as a CRO. And there are a lot of companies that hire a glorified CRO, which is actually just a VP of sales.
And the CRO reports to the CEO?
Yeah, correct.
Do they ever report to the COO?
In more upmarket, larger organizations where the COO is running the P&L, yes. But in the instance that we're talking about, lower middle market companies between 10 to 100 million in revenue, typically, no, there's just not that much over at the top. So yeah, you've got the CEO, and then all of the management team reports into that.
So share with me some scenarios or examples of why these CROs, when they get into the role and they're all excited and they just, within a year, they fail. Why are they failing? What is going on out there?
So within private equity, there is a condensed time period where this company has to grow. So private equity, they're going to make, compared to VC, they're going to make more risk-adjusted bets on mature organizations that already have product market fit, that already have customers, that are already growing to a certain degree. And compared to VC, where they're committing series of capital, and especially the Series A and B rounds, those are high-risk investments. Usually 10 to 20% of those companies only make it. The other 80, 90% fail out. That is not the case in private equity. And so private equity, what they're trying to accomplish is to really 3 to 5x this company in a 3 to 5 year time horizon. And so to be able to do that, they're not buying these unicorn companies that have incredible products that are rocket ship organizations. They're buying unsexy, and let's just call it, we'll stick in this topic, unsexy technology businesses that have good product, good retention, great cash flow, and now they just need professionalization. And so I think where CROs in these sizes of organizations get stuck is they come in and they think they need to put in a great strategy. Most of the time, the private equity firm already has a strategy for how the company is going to grow. It's called an investment thesis that's usually already baked out. And then they come in, they think, okay, I have to put in a great strategy. I have to hire a huge team of a lot of resources to put in all of these expensive tools. And then the organization is going to start to perform well. When in reality, what needs to happen is, because private equity firms put more risk-adjusted, bigger bets on these businesses, they do so by using debt. And because there's debt on the balance sheet, now that's less cash for them to operate with, which means there's less budget for these sales leaders and these CROs to go and hire a lot of resources and people and the tools and the technology and everything they need to run a professionalized go-to-market organization. It will get there at one point, but call it in the first 2 years when they're trying to go from 10 to 20 or 25 million in revenue. That is roll up the sleeves. You are doing a lot yourself in terms of, design, scripting, all of the hiring, the AE team, the SDR team, the marketing team. And then you're also doing, you are literally scripting all of the sales processes. You're configuring the CRM. You might have a Salesforce admin or a third-party company helping you out, but you are the one actually configuring that. You're putting in the sales process to map against that. You're putting in the forecasting. You're putting in every single process that needs to go in. You are the one defining that. And so when a CRO takes one of these jobs, they think, okay, I'm going to get in here and just hire people to go do all of the things I just mentioned. That's when they get in trouble, because they now realize, oh, I now need to actually go do those things, and I haven't done those in 5 to 7 years. And oh, by the way, I don't want to do those things. It's not what I thought the role actually was. And so that's usually a disconnect that I see.
Is that a failure on the hire, imposter syndrome, saying, oh yeah, I can do all this, and then they get in there and like, I don't want to do this, or I don't know how to do this? Or is it a failure on the process where that skill set and willingness should have been vetted out during the interview process?
Combination of the two. Yeah, I think imposter syndrome does live in a lot, actually almost everyone, but obviously in a lot of these executives that are trying to assess roles where, yeah, they say to themselves, what we talk about a lot is just having transparent awareness of your skill set and your capability in terms of what you want to do. And then being extremely diligent about, is this the right situation where I can actually use that skill set to the best of my ability? There are some executives that know how to do that really well. And then there are some executives who just, to their own, it's not to their own fault, but this might be their first private equity backed organization. They just don't know the landscape they're walking into. So it's part on the private equity firm and the portfolio company and that recruiter to get that person educated to say, here's exactly what you're walking into. Here's the resources you're going to have. Here's what life is going to look like on day 60, 90, 100. And then it's also part on the executive to figure that out themselves and do the diligence to be really clear about, is that, skill set a fit? So
partly redundant question, because you've answered it throughout all of your answers to all of my questions. So thank you for that. But what are you looking for in that CRO? And if you could answer it as if it were a list, 1, 2, 3, 4, here are the 6 things, because that makes for really helpful information for a founder to think, all right, here's what I need to look for when I go hire that CRO.
Yeah, so there are a few things, and I'll just run down the list. So I don't know how many we're going to come up with, so we'll see what it's at the end. So the way that I always view it is number one, and this is table stakes, they have to have the track record. So the way that we run all of our hiring processes, we'll survey. Like if you're in our process and you're a candidate, I will send you a survey ahead of us doing a deep dive on your entire background for you to basically answer, the starting and ending revenue and EBITDA growth for your last 3 companies. So I can explicitly see what the companies you've been in, have they grown? If they have, great. I'm going to want to know why. If they haven't, then I'm going to want to know the story with that too, because there are some great leaders that get caught up in bad deals, and they might be outperforming their market to a certain degree, and it could be a down market for whatever reason. So track record is what I look at first. Just have they been in situations where they have outperformed their market? Have they been with companies that are growing? What are they specifically doing to enable that growth? That's just table stakes. That's what I look at first. Next, and this is what I do in all of my hiring processes, and I encourage any founder who's looking for a VP of Sales or CRO to really sit down and figure out what are the top 3 things that I need this person to come in and do and accomplish in the first year in the role. Because from there, you're going to start to reverse engineer the type of background that you need for the role. And that also starts to create a scorecard that you can interview against. So anytime we're kicking off a process, I will ask that question. And then based on the answer to that question, that starts to develop the skill set. So let's just say this is a founder-led business. It was just acquired by private equity. They need this person to come in and implement Salesforce.com, put in the sales process, and get the entire team trained, as well as hire and onboard the entire team. So those are 3 things right there that I'm going to test for in my interview process to make sure that they have those and have relevant and clear examples of how they've done that time and time again, that they can take that skill set and apply it here. And then in all of my calls with them, with any candidate, I'm going to explicitly say, here are the 3 things that you have to come in and do. Here's the resources you're going to have, and it's going to be clear as day. So I think first thing is track record. Second thing is assessing the skill set of any individual for that portfolio company and whatever the task is at hand. I think that is so fundamentally important when you're talking about trying to hire, because in every single case, it's going to be a different hiring profile, and it's just going to be a different person you need because every company is unique. So those are the first 2 things I look for. And then when you're hiring VP of Sales CRO, I think where I've seen a lot of companies go astray is they think, okay, I need to go out and hire somebody that comes from this exact domain. They know our customers. They can come in with a Rolodex, and they can hit the ground running that way, which I do agree with to a degree. I think having a Rolodex is a good thing, but if you are hiring a leader just for their Rolodex, like you have to sit back and say, okay, what is that person's value after the first 6 to 9 months when they burn through that Rolodex? I've seen it time and time again where they've hired that person, and then 9 months later they come back to us and say, they were really good for the first 3 months, and they had a lot of value, but the pipeline dried up, and the team was not hired correctly. They were not onboarded correctly. Now they're not all performing, and there's just cracks in the entire go-to-market. So I think when you're talking about the industry/domain conversation, we always start there to try to find somebody in that same domain, but we're trying to find the best sales leader, the best process-oriented person that can come in and add a lot of quick wins, but also, build the plan as you're flying it. So, the top 3 things to look for, like I said, are track record, assessing the skill set, and then, making sure that they have the right domain, whether it's, selling into the right end markets, whether it's selling into, the same ACV, whether it's, SMB sale, mid-market sale, enterprise. We're not trying to hire an enterprise seller for a SMB motion. And so making sure you match that up correctly. And then that's all just related to the background. Then you get into the person, which is this would be the last part of it. And when we're hiring for private equity-backed organizations, this is going to be a sprint of a lifetime. Executives working 80, 90 hours a week. They are constantly thinking of ways to add value, constantly driving to transform the company and transform the go-to-market. Every single day in a 5-year sprint counts. And the clock is always going to be against them. The private equity firm will always be watching. There will be a ton of metrics on the business, so they will always know the health of your go-to-market organization. So we are looking for people that have and this is my partner Rob's quote, I cannot take credit for this, but we are always looking for people that have a white-collar brain, and can add a lot of value at the board level from a high level strategy standpoint, but then have a blue collar work ethic to roll up the sleeves, get things done, and tactically execute in a very under-resourced environment. And so we use Crucible for that, which is obviously the assessment that I was talking about earlier, that tests and grades and weights based on really do they spike in the key areas that we need for a successful private equity backed executive. And then we use plenty of questions and interviewing tactics aside from that to get a feel for, is this a person that can hold up in a 5-year sprint? Because it's going to be a very challenging time, and we need people that have resiliency, grit, and the willingness to basically out execute anything that they're thrown at. So that's a lot of what I look for. I know I just threw a lot at you.
No, it's good. I got it all, and it's super helpful. There's one question that I have that I didn't hear from you, which is you mentioned, I need a candidate who's got a Rolodex or specific experience in this vertical, which I argue I'd rather have the athlete than the person who knows the vertical. I'd rather have both. But if you can't get that, go with the athlete versus the vertical expertise. But what about size of company? Do you have requests where they'll say, I only want people that have done 5 to 20, 10 to 50, or 100 to 250? And what are your thoughts on the relevance of that question, or that requirement, I should say?
Yeah, so in terms of size of company, this is where that question kind of gets, there's some confusion there, because there are some, I've seen, there's the common misconception that you can't go hire somebody from a global organization that has $3 billion in revenue and have them come down and be successful in a $10 to $20 million business. That can happen. I think the only time that can happen is if that person operating in that global behemoth was leading an autonomous unit where they had full responsibility, they had little resources, they had to be creative, and they had to execute, and they had to build, as opposed to being caught in this big matrix organization where they're not really responsible for anything. They're just going out and leading a team and just getting a little bit better quarter over quarter. That is such a different mindset and approach to business than the environment they're going to be stepping into. So there are leaders up in that, call it, $1 billion range, $3 billion range, where you can find people that are good fit for coming down. And then outside of that, we try, let's just say it's a $10 million business. We'll keep going back to that example, looking to grow to 50. We do try to get people on that growth curve. Now, there's always the argument where if you're going to find somebody who's spent time from 10 to 50, and this is a CRO hire or a VP of Sales hire, a number one, call it, ideally you want that person to have been the number one throughout that growth path. Because now the pitch is, okay, come back down to 10 million. You just ran that. You understand how to do it. You understand all the key failures and the challenges, so you can do it better, faster. So we'll usually look at that. Now, in this case, we'll also look at people who have been in organizations, let's say that they've grown from 50 to 100 million, but they were the number two, or a regional VP of Sales or divisional VP of Sales, where the CRO of those organizations is going to be too big. They're going to be too expensive. They're going to be focused on strategy. But that number two is doing a lot of the tactical execution that is required for a company that's 10 million in revenue. Then they're pulling a lot of the same levers, and they're typically closer to the front lines. And really, at the end of the day, they are really, really good at frontline sales effectiveness, which is really effectively the job of a VP of Sales CRO for a company that's 10 million in revenue looking to grow to 50. And so that's the way that we think about size relative to position and scope in organizations. It's a good question.
So let's talk about unrealistic expectations. My guess is you've had multiple private equity clients and or founders say to you, Joe, go find me a pink elephant that, yada, yada, yada. Give me an example of a couple of those, because again, my goal here in this conversation is to focus on people, which arguably number one line item or biggest expense on your OpEx. And if you don't get people right, you're probably not going to get the rest of your company right. It's just, the whole thing goes down. So people is really important. What are unrealistic expectations? Any stories you have of nightmares? Love to hear it.
Yeah, unrealistic expectations are when you're not willing to pay market comp for that level of individual. And so I think a lot of the times when we're speccing out these roles, what we will do is we'll get everybody on the hiring team together, and we will have a transparent conversation rooted in data, because private equity people, they love data. That is what they are. They love spreadsheets. They love data. They love numbers. They assess risk based on that. And so anytime that we are kicking off a search and we're trying to spec out, okay, here's the strategy, going back to that $10 million example, let's just say it's a software company that sells into healthcare in Nashville, Tennessee. And what we will do for them is, if they start to stack on the criteria, let's just say they want private equity experience, they want this person to be a been there, done that VP of Sales or CRO that comes from, a healthcare technology business in Nashville, we will transparently pull all of that research for them in PitchBook, which we spend probably $150,000 a year on, to make sure that all of our, oh yeah. I mean, every single person in the organization has a license, and we just constantly mine private equity-backed deals. So we'll pull that data and show them the exact number of private equity-backed organizations that are healthcare technology in Nashville, and we'll have a pragmatic conversation to say, look, here's the universe that you're going after, and which is fine. It's relatively small and it's finite, and we can go hard at that for the first 2 weeks of the search. But here are some key considerations on how to expand, because if you're really trying to get the best athlete, then you should go as wide as you physically can on the criteria to try to attract as many people into the process. And then from there, we can sit back and pick the best person who's actually equipped and has the right skill set and everything that we just talked about to go out and do a really good job. Because if you go too narrow on that and you're trying to find this unicorn, then you're going to settle for the best available person, let's just say in Nashville, who's on the market for hopefully the right reason in healthcare technology. Whereas, if you were to open that up and go at least within the region or go nationwide, and you want to keep everything else, that's going to widen the pool. If you want to stay in Nashville and you want to look at just everyone that's in healthcare technology, a company that size, and you don't care if they come from private equity or VC or public-private, then that's going to open the pool. So it's just anchoring them back to the data of, when they say something, we're going to come back with data to say, here's exactly what you're saying, and here's the market of which you're basically asking us to go out and look in. And that's fine. We can go out and run that, but here's going to be the trade-offs. Here's the consequences of that. So just constantly reminding them of the consequences of decisions, because they don't do this every day. They don't have PitchBook. They don't have the data. This is what we do on a daily basis. So it's our responsibility, and it's our job as an executive search firm to constantly make sure we're giving them the insights to be able to make more informed decisions around the hire and the entire search.
Joe, what percentage of the time do they go, hey, Joe, thanks so much. This is super helpful. Yep, I got it. We're going to adjust. Versus, nope, dig their heels in. This is what we want. We're going to do it our way.
50-50.
Really?
Yeah. And look, and sometimes they're right. Sometimes they really want to dig in and just find that person who's local, who's, comes from that exact domain. And we will continue to execute that search for them, but we will just blatantly tell them you're not going to see the quantity of quality candidates that you otherwise would see if we open it up here. And so, a lot of our private equity clients that we work with who value our opinion and value the data will, tend to adjust and shift, and especially ones who value the best athlete versus the industry specialists or the local person or whatever it is. And you get plenty of founders and, private equity firms who don't value that as much, and we'll continue on that effort. And yeah, they're fine with trading off a little bit of horsepower for getting somebody from the industry. It's crazy to say, but that does happen out there.
Interesting. Will you ever turn down a search because they dig their heels in and don't want to do what you are suggesting they do?
Rarely, but yes, we will. Especially if they're not being pragmatic about and realistic about what's in the market. And we're happy to go out and do it, but we're also not here to to work miracles either.
So let's talk about the interview process a little bit. What turns hires off?
Yeah, in terms of how they can bomb out of an interview fastest.
Like I read a post that you put out there within the last week or so that basically said, competing offers. You talked about people running for the hills, but what tell founders out there in founder land, tell private equity investors out there in private equity, you want to scare the shit out of a potential really good, strong, talented hire, here's what you should do. Versus if you want to get people interested and make sure, here's what you need to do. It's the good versus the bad. Answer it however you want, but I'd be curious.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. So the basic thing that any founder and private equity investor has to understand when starting an interview process is that this is a two-way educational journey where you are trying to educate your prospective hire on your organization, on what you're going to be asking of them, and you're trying to excite them, because what's happening right now in private equity is there is a record number of private equity deals out there. The number of private equity portfolio companies is growing at 10% per year, whereas the talent pool is only growing at 1% to 2% per year. So that gap of number of organizations out there that need a relatively fixed number of people that can go do that leadership job is widening. And so any executive out there who you like that's in your process, Mr. or Mrs. Founder, is going to, I can guarantee you, be in 5 to 7 other processes very similar to yours. So you will always be competing for that individual. And so the thing to keep in mind is this is an educational process, and that to educate, you have to show up to that interview ready to not pitch and sell your organization, but transparently inform them about what you're trying to accomplish over the next 5 years, the resources that person's going to have, where they see that person fitting in, and be transparent about the financials, be transparent about the challenges, be transparent about the market and how that's growing, or if you're replacing somebody, what happened previously. The more transparent you can be, the better. You're going to scare off some people, no doubt, but the ones who stick around are going to be the ones that you want working for your organization. That's so key. I think anytime, the easiest way to scare off any prospective candidate that could be an otherwise really good fit is essentially to give them nothing about your organization, be short with that, just show up to that interview and start grilling them about their background and their skill sets and do they fit. Because they're obviously evaluating this too, and it's an important decision for any executive. This is going to impact their families, it's going to impact their career potential, and so they take that pretty seriously as well. So just being able to show up and inform them and educate them as to what they're actually stepping into. And then two, equity is a large portion of why these executives are attracted to private equity. You get an equity stake in the business that is at the value of the organization when you join, and as the value of that organization increases, your equity is going to increase. So, and obviously, it's going to end in a liquidity event for you and a great payday at the end. So, there's a lot of the really good private equity firms out there will also do a good job of educating the candidate and the executive on their equity package, give them an Excel analysis as to the base case, the make case, the stretch case of what their equity is going to be worth at certain scenarios and certain levels of revenue and EBITDA and valuation, and then be completely transparent about the path to get there and what that executive is going to have to do. And you'd be surprised at how many private equity firms get to that stage and don't want to provide that Excel document, don't want to provide much. They just want to try to close the candidate. That's just not a great way to really gain the trust, which is what they're trying to do at the end of the day, with that candidate and executive you're trying to get to your company. So that's a lot of what you can do is just show up and inform and educate.
So being a CRO myself, having worked both venture and private equity firms, and having done it 10 times over the course of 20 plus years, I hear the same thing all the time. Hey, Dan, can you come in here and help us get to the next level? And of course, after as much evaluation, asking all the right questions, I now know a lot more about what to look for. So I know, what I'm getting into. Expectations setting is critically important, hugely important. That said, what they really should say when they're interviewing every time is, hey, we want you to help us get to the next level, but we got a lot of dysfunction that we need you to unravel. In the case of my podcast series, unfuck, and turn it around and get it on the right track and scale and grow so that we can exit. That's what we need you to do. Now, because they don't say that, and I've done it so many times, I know that that's what I'm getting into, but a lot of CROs who've only done a couple, maybe one or two in their past, they don't necessarily know this. And then you come in and then you start looking in the closets and underneath the cushions, and you find all kinds of crazy shit that you didn't know was there because no one knew, no one told you, or no one told you. So what I'd like to know is your thoughts on, there's only two reasons why this happens. One is they didn't want to tell you because they didn't want to scare you off, in which case you're doing everybody a disservice if you're withholding information that's critical to what actually has to get done in this job. Or number two, you just don't know, which is, quite frankly, ignorance. And that's okay, because I expect that they're hiring a CRO perhaps for the first time to do things that they don't know how to do, that the CRO does know how to do. So let that person do that. But be open about, hey, there are definitely going to be skeletons in the closet and all kinds of stuff that I don't know about. And if I knew what they were, I'd tell you, but I don't. So just expect that that's going to happen. Comment on that, would you?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it both cases. I think also, too, these are, in a lot of cases, and same goes for founders, same goes for any just high-achieving individual to a certain degree, they have ego. And it hurts their ego to say that there's a massive hole or problem in the organization to go out to the market. And let's just say you're trying to look for somebody in your industry or domain, and you're talking to competitors, VPs of sales or CROs, to admit that there's an issue. When we all know companies have issues, we all know there's bodies buried throughout the organization. And the fact that you're looking for a CRO or VP of sales in most cases means that there's some issues there. And most intelligent CROs and VPs of sales are going to be able to ask the questions to try to get at that. And they're constantly trying to find, okay, what needs fixing? Because that's really what private equity is at the end of the day. Value creation is it's finding things to fix and going to fix them, or we already know what needs to be fixed. We just need somebody to come in and fix them. And so I think I appreciate working with the CEOs and the founders who are totally transparent about what needs to get fixed, which gets back to the earlier point that we were talking about where, what are the top three things you need this person to come in and do, AKA come in and fix? The ones who have crystal clear alignment and clarity around that, and because they have the self-esteem to admit it, those processes go really well and they find somebody who can fix exactly those things. The founder or CEO that, is too scared to admit that, and they say vague things that, otherwise confuse candidates or just don't make it clear as to what this person actually has to come in and do, then that's where you end up getting a skill fit mismatch.
Message to founders from Dan Hurwitz and Joe Gravino. Check your ego at the door when interviewing a top go-to-market executive. The fact that you have created a company this size, this successful, is really difficult, and most fail, but you haven't. It's okay to not know something, and it's okay to share the skeletons in the closet and your warts and your bruises with that candidate only because you're setting expectations properly. So if you want to win, be open about it.
Yeah, my goal in a lot of these processes is I'm trying to scare away people from the private equity firm, from the organization, and I want the ones who are going to stick around and say, you know what? I'm not scared. That's a great challenge, and I'm up for the test. So it's a great way to weed out the people. You would rather find that out in the interview process than 60 days on the job. Trying to unravel that hire is more painful than anything that you can do with just extending that search. Because obviously you introduce them to the team and they start to make strategic choices and start to put in process. You have to unravel that, and now the search is delayed, and it's not a great situation. So double down, make sure that you're doing the work to understand and be clear about what you need this person to come in and do, and then use that as your North Star when you're interviewing.
Gotta love the North Star. I talk about the North Star all the time, for sure. Hey, Joe, it's been great talking to you. I appreciate and love the conversation. Your expertise is phenomenal. How do people get a hold of you if they want to reach out and get you on their radar?
Yeah, like you said, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so reach out there, as well as you can obviously find me on falcon-pe.com or pecxo.com. Check all those out. They're all great resources, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
Great. Awesome. Thanks for the conversation. Have a great day.
Yeah, thanks. You too. Appreciate you having me on.
All right. See you later.